In 2004, right after George W. Bush was elected for the second time, Toni Morrison had this to say, quote, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art," end quote. I don't think you ever need an excuse to revisit Toni Morrison or her work. There's never a bad time to open Beloved or The Bluest Eye for the first time or for the 100th time. And after reading that passage, in a world so desperately in need of the healing that she speaks of, it is time for the Velshi Band Book Club to turn to Toni Morrison once again. Today's feature is Toni Morrison's award-winning third novel, a work that, depending on who you ask, is her greatest, Song of Solomon. The novel begins with a death and with a birth. Quote, "The North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance agent promised to fly from Mercy to the other side of Lake Superior at 3 o'clock. Standing on the roof of a building, the insurance agent jumps to his death. The trauma of his death causes Ruth, who is among the townspeople watching from the ground below, to go into labor. Her baby, who becomes known by the nickname Milkman, grows up to be disillusioned, selfish, and even from childhood unable to return the love and devotion that he receives from his mother, his sisters, and his Aunt Pilot. Although born to a prominent black doctor and landowner, the painful legacy of slavery is still a wound that is untreated. By age 32, Milkman is restless and resentful. He leaves home in search of a fortune, bars of gold allegedly hidden by his Aunt Pilot. What Milkman finds, however, is more valuable: an understanding of his past, his heritage, and as a result, an understanding of himself. When we read Beloved on the Velshi Band Book Club last year, I said that this is one of those novels that's difficult to summarize because its nuance and its lyrical language and its themes are as inherent to the story as the bones of the plot. I think this is even more true of the Song of Solomon. Author Tayari Jones, who wrote the new introduction for Song of Solomon, agrees, quote, "Morrison's gift lies in the even-handedness of her passions. Her layered characters engaged in layered relationships, ponder layered dilemmas upon a layered landscape. These situations are varied in color and texture, like the rocky cliffs that line some seashores, and adhering these details, these dynamics and facts and fictions and actions and ideas, is language. With Morrison, it always comes back to language," end quote. Although Song of Solomon follows a man, it is a story about women. It is a story about what becomes of the women who are left behind, abandoned, so that men might be free to take flight, to find themselves, to embark on their own hero's journey. And because it's Morrison, Song of Solomon is about so much more than that: the alienation of racism, the power of names and oral tradition, liberation, the importance of community, the lasting effect of slavery in this country, trauma, and how foundational and necessary it is to understand your lineage and background in order to understand yourself. Today's meeting of the Velshi Band Book Club is officially in session. We're taking another look at the great Toni Morrison. This time we're examining her third published novel, which is a true masterpiece of American fiction, Song of Solomon. And to discuss it, I'm joined by another great, Tayari Jones. Jones wrote the foreword to the latest edition of Song of Solomon. She's the author of 5 novels, including the recently published blockbuster of a novel, Kin, which we are going to talk about separately on another visit. Tayari, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the foreword that you wrote for the re-release of Song of Solomon. In it, you write about one of the central themes in the book, which is heritage. You write, quote, "When Milkman leaves the cold world of Michigan for the verdant hills of Virginia, he finds the legitimate keepers of histories in gas stations, parlors, and even the woods. They share more than the mere names of the generations past. Painful stories, some remembered, some handed down as heirlooms, reveal the contours of nearly forgotten lives," end quote. Tell me a bit more about this.
You know, Milkman is a young man of a privileged background who feels like his life is empty, and he goes on a search to find out, who he really is. Like today, everyone will order their 23andMe kit and, swab their cheeks and get a printout, a graph, a pie chart to tell them who they are. But in Song of Solomon, you see that if you don't talk to people, you will never know what the real history is. Records often cannot be trusted. What can be seen, what can be touched, felt, are physical artifacts that people hold close over the generations and stories that are passed down as the true legacy of a family and of a community.
Let's talk about Aunt Pilate. She's described as being born without a navel, and I think that's meant to underscore her spiritual nature. Tell me what you find from that.
You know, she has no navel, so there's no kind of tangible evidence that she was ever born of a mother. But it's ironic because she is the one that is most connected to the generations gone by. Any understanding of the truth of Milkman's past, of Milkman's father's past, it all must come through Pilate, who carries with her a physical legacy of bones.
So if you go from Pilate to the novel's opening scene, there's this element of magical realism throughout the novel. Tell me the significance of Morrison marrying myth and reality in Song of Solomon.
I don't know that Morrison would necessarily call this magical realism. I think she may just call it realism because for many people, magic is real. It isn't a device or a gimmick. There is a sense that the past is always with us, that ghosts, both literal and metaphoric, are around us everywhere. And this is why Pilate is able to understand the world in the way that her very kind of empirically minded nephew cannot. She knows that everyone we have ever known is still here in the room with us.
Let's talk about something that's going on currently. We're in the midst of what one New York Times book critic called a wave of Morrisonia. 11 of her books, Song of Solomon, are being reissued and re-released. Tell me about that and why that's happening now.
I mean, I think it's as simple as the fact that Morrison is, the greatest American novelist to ever, pick up a pen, to ever play the game. And here, we're approaching the anniversary of her passing. It only makes sense that these American treasures be re-released with new introductions by writers of a different generation, explaining how these stories are and will always be relevant to how we understand who we are as a nation, especially now in such times of strife. These stories provide roadmaps sometimes. Some other times they provide just good ideas, cautionary tales to how we should take the next steps forward if we want to have a country that is just, fair, and nurturing to everyone.
Well, that quote I wrote in the intro after the election of George W. Bush, which seems now quaint compared to the moments that we're in right now, but it was very telling, right? It's in these moments, this is what we need to rely on. I think that becomes as relevant. It's perhaps more relevant now than when Toni Morrison wrote that or many of the other things that she wrote.
I mean, I think the real question for any time you find yourself puzzled by the moment we're in, you have to ask yourself, what happened? And in fiction, we can find a different kind of answer to that question of what happened, because fiction goes into people's homes, into people's hearts in a different way that, say, important books of history. When we find out what happened between members of a family, what happens when a Black boy went to the emergency room, what happened when Milkman traveled to Virginia and found his great aunt who is living in the home of the people she worked for because she wants to see that home fall to pieces. We understand it differently. And when we understand, we can make meaningful decisions about the way forward.
Is there a way, if you are revisiting Toni Morrison or you're new to Toni Morrison, given the sort of the sustaining relevance of her work, is there a way you'd tell our viewers to approach how to start reading this?
I feel that Morrison has this reputation for being so difficult. So people want to know, like, how do I get in? As though there's some kind of complicated lock that you need a formula to open. But One thing that Morrison doesn't get enough credit for is that she plots a novel like a house on fire. You will turn the pages just to find out what happens next. Because of her profundity, people think of her as kind of like, take your medicine, eat your spinach. But this book is a delight. You will laugh out loud. You will find yourself, quoting her more masterful lines about everyday life. Just jump into it. Put aside whatever your English teacher may have told you and pick it up because it is a pleasure to read. It is a profound pleasure. And by that, I mean not that it is merely profoundly pleasurable, but there is a profundity laced within this story.
This is interesting that you say this because it's something that we talk about on the Velshi Band Book Club, that forget the rules you learned about how you should consume information or consume books. Just read them and just enjoy them. And I appreciate you saying that. Tara, you'll be back to talk about Kin very shortly, so I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today to talk about Song of Solomon. Tara Jones is the newest member of the Velshi Band Book Club. She will be back with us to discuss her novel Kin, which is a story about friendship and motherhood in the American South. It is already being heralded as one of the best books of the year. So you'll want to read that, and then we'll talk to her on the show. That